Hey there, friends and enemies, JoPaWrites here again, and today I want to talk about 5 exotic weapons that absolutely need a buff as soon as possible. These are not used really by anybody, anywhere, in any type of content, and every exotic, I feel like, should have somewhere that it shines. Now, we've seen the anti-champion intrinsic perks added to some of the exotic weapons, and that's a good feature, so I might include that in not only which weapons need a buff, but also how I personally would see that buffed. And so the first one, the top 4 are really egregious and absolutely need to be changed. The first one I think is just a personal thing that I think I would like to see a bit more synergy with, and that is Sturm. Now, I was debating as my 5th slot going with Sturm or Cerberus +1. This is a weapon that I really, really love. I actually think it's not that bad, but it's never really shined and had a chance to be special. And that's one thing that I think is unfortunate. I feel like every weapon that's an exotic should at some point or another really be powerful. But I'm going to say Sturm, and the reason being, I would love to see a really powerful synergy with this and the Drang. Maybe in PvE, not necessarily PvP, where it's been decent in the past, but give it some kind of perk where Sturm gets an intrinsic anti-barrier or anti-overload. And if you hit an enemy with either the Drang or the Sturm and stun a champion, the other one gets bonus damage versus the champion. Or something of that nature, you know? I feel like having that synergy to make people really want to run that combo that's not really used anymore would be awesome and would allow this to really have a resurgence and be used in PvE. It still might be just for fun and not super powerful, but I think that could be a good option going forward, and it's something that I would love to see because this is just a combo that's really, there's no reason at this point to really bust out the Sturm for the most part. I do see it on PC, PvP from time to time, but it's so rare these days. And making it solid in PvE, I think, would counter that. So next up, we're going to go with something that I was actually really hopeful for with Solar 3.0, and that was Merciless. Merciless was my favorite exotic in year 1 of Destiny 2. However, it is just overshadowed by every and anything these days, and it just doesn't do what it could potentially do. This one could do, you could add an anti-champion intrinsic perk, but I feel like more likely you give this a buff, you know, and you add something like incandescent to the Merciless to really make it shine. I feel like right now it's just not a weapon that is ever going to be useful when there's legendary fusion rifles with Vorpal weapon and legendary fusions that are just better. Maybe they have a reservoir burst, you know? So having this have something like incandescent or some other way to synergize it with Solar 3.0, I think would be tremendous. It's already gotten its catalyst, so really that's not a direction you can go with this. I know adding a catalyst like to Thunderlord, that can be huge as well. So for the weapons that already have their catalyst, I think you gotta give it an intrinsic perk that it might have been missing. So that's where I would go. Maybe intrinsic incandescent or something of that nature to really make it shine and make it useful as an option with Solar 3.0. Now we're getting into the exotic sniper rifles that just don't do it, and that is Borealis. I know some people like this in PvP, a small amount of niche guardians who really want to use this all the time, but it's just not good enough. You know, it's not something that I think can be useful in everyday content for the majority of people, and that's really, really unfortunate because this has the potential to be great. You'd think with something like Match Game this would be very useful, but it's just, unfortunately, it's not the option that I think it could be with a little bit of a bonus. Now, this is one specifically that I would give a unstoppable mod to, and the reason being, we don't have a lot of anti-unstoppable weapons compared to overload and barrier, in my opinion, or ones that are really, really useful, especially at long range. Plus, we normally see the anti-barrier sniper be the mod of choice, so giving it an unstoppable intrinsic perk, I think would make this a lot better. But even more so than that, give it a perk that when you change it to a specific weapon type, it does, like, if it matches your subclass, it does bonus damage, you know? So that way you have it to be a variety where it can be useful against all kinds of different shields, but then you can switch it to whatever subclass you're on and it's going to do extra damage. So maybe it'll be useful against bosses and champions and stuff like that as well. So that's just something that I would say as an option to give it a buff, because this is a weapon that I don't think it sees barely any use these days, and it's just so unfortunate because the potential is there. The use of being able to change between the 3 different elemental types is useful, but not powerful enough to make this worthwhile, and that's why I would definitely buff this thing with some kind of change. Now we're getting into one that I know a lot of people have called for, and that is going to be Darcy. Now, Darcy as a heavy weapon is controversial enough, right? A lot of people think this should be in the special slot and don't see it as being worthy of a heavy weapon. It doesn't do the damage that like Whisper the Worm does, so it's just never going to live up to the hype. It's not going to be anywhere near good enough unless it gets a major buff. Now, what that buff could look like could be any number of things. Obviously, intrinsic anti-champion mod could be a solid choice. But realistically, I think this has got to be something where the lock-on mechanism gives it an even greater benefit than it gets right now. So, like, your personal assistant has got to improve it in a much better way to allow it to be on par with other heavy exotics, right? Because right now, linear fusions, Galahorn, there's just really, I mean, even swords, there's no reason to run Darcy, and there hasn't been for far too long. So this either needs to do more damage, significantly more damage, or give it a reason to not only take on champions, but make it viable in endgame content. It's just right now, this is one of the most disappointing. If I were to list these, like, I have gone in order of which ones I think need the buff the least compared to now. Darcy is probably second on my list of the top 2 exotic weapons that absolutely need a buff as soon as possible. And I would love to see this be viable. I just want to use weapons that haven't seen a time to shine ever, basically, in Destiny 2, at least in a long time. We're talking years and years. So Darcy definitely could use something of a buff. And then, number 1. You may be surprised by this, but you probably won't be. Salvation's Grip. This is probably the worst exotic, not only in Destiny 2, but probably in that's ever been seen in the Destiny franchise, in my personal opinion. This is the most useless exotic, and I have no idea what they were thinking when they made this, or how they think it could be a decent option. I know there's going to be some comments out of left field saying, what, with a stasis build, it's actually not that. There's no shot anybody in any type of viable content is using Salvation's Grip. It's just not happening. But the benefit of this one, there is no catalyst. So you could give this bad boy a catalyst that could make it much, much better. And I think that would be absolutely great. I would love to use this in all kinds of content. Say you give it something like breaking the stasis crystal debuffs the enemy. So you give it almost a tractor cannon effect. Or you make it so the crystals are even more advantageous. They buff you and they buff your stasis subclass or anything like that could be useful. This is one that is in dire need of assistance, and I hope that we get it sooner rather than later, because this is an exotic that I don't feel like anybody has actually used outside of the quests when Beyond Light first dropped, and then just shoved it into the vault, dismantled it, whatever the case may be. And that's really unfortunate, because I strongly believe it. I've said this before. Every exotic should have its chance to shine. Anyway, let me know in the comments down below, which exotic weapons would you most like to see buffed in the future? What do you think about my list? I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, hit that like button. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. I throw out Destiny content on the regular. My name is JoPa. I hope you have a good one, and I'll catch you all later.